Have you ever been so burdened with your own life, your own thoughts, your own mistakes, that you didn't even want to tell other people? That actually the own thoughts in your own mind made you think that even your own presence was a burden to others, that your existence was worse being around people and it was just better off to be alone? Come to me. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. This lesson is very interesting. The quarter is talking about rest, and this specific lesson is talking about the yoke. Basically, this burden that we think of when being Christian, when following this path of Christ, all these things that we think about. But it's actually fascinating because the lesson is presenting something else. Look at these titles. On Sunday, it says, I will give you rest. Monday, take my yoke upon you. Tuesday, I am gentle and lowly in heart. Wednesdays, for my yoke is easy. Thursdays, my burden is light. So it's interesting that this lesson is kind of giving the opposite of what we normally think of being Christians. We think of martyrdom. We think of people suffering and having to almost bear more than they can handle, but it's all a test. It's all for a good thing. And we even see now in other Christian faiths that people harm themselves as a way of punishing. We need to be punished to be purified because that fire is there to purify us and destroy us so we can be, rebuilt into something else. But that's not what this lesson is talking about. So I'm actually going to grab all those days and condense them and just flow through it. So you won't really be able to follow, but I'm going in order from what I just read. Basically, what was surprising to me is that we know this when we read the Bible. We see every moment in the Bible, basically through this history, how these stories are pointing to one thing. This is all one theme, right? We're looking at Jesus. And it's not just one specific story, it's that sacrifice. The sacrifice that someone is taking our place where we deserve to die and dying in our place. And this is like from the very beginning. But we also see the story showing each moment in the Bible, every story we read, how, for example, with Abraham, he was following God. He had the promise that God gave him that he would have a son, but Abraham decided to figure out something with his wife. They took matters into their own hands, and he slept with Sarah, his wife's servant, and it created a lot of problems. And we keep seeing that throughout history, with Moses having to, when he actually got frustrated, hitting the rock because he actually took that burden that wasn't his, it was towards God that they were all complaining, but he took it upon himself, and how that resulted in him not being able to see Canaan. We see with David, we see with Samson, the decisions that he made. And to me, what's the most interesting, that is a smaller version of this, is when Jesus is walking to his disciples during the storm. They think they see a ghost. Peter realizes it's Jesus, wants to walk on the water to him. Everything is fine until he starts thinking for himself and realizing, hold on, how am I doing this? Instead of trusting in Jesus, and he starts sinking, because he took that burden upon himself, that he was the one that had to make sure that he was okay. So that's the theme of this lesson. And it's very fascinating to me because this is what we kind of neglect, we kind of forget, because this lesson is just talking about that, how this burden is not what we think. Look at this, what Tuesday says. Gentleness is an underrated quality today. Humility is laughed at. Social media has taught us to pay attention to the loud, the noisy, the weird and wild, and the flamboyant. Truly, so many of the world's standards are the opposite of what God deems important and valuable. Because we have now focused so much on these other things that we are burdened with unnecessary stuff. We can't even sit still. We can't even pay attention. That title for Tuesday is I am gentle and lowly in heart. How are we being gentle? How are we pondering things? See, that's the big problem. If we're so focused on on not even having time to think, we're going to want to act instinctually. We're going to want to make decisions on our own. And where is God going to fit in that? Where is he going to fit in where we'll have patience, prayer, and reading the Bible, make the decisions that we should? Where is that going to come into play? So to me, I think that this is what's important, and that's why I wanted to condense everything for this lesson, because it's not something we normally see. And you should read the lesson because it explains everything about how Jesus uses yoke when he's referring to himself and the burden that we will bear, because it's completely different than what we would think. And the reason why it's light is because it's simple. It's not a complicated solution the way we would think. Look at this one example. Jesus is walking in to Jerusalem, and he finally rides a donkey in, and he's coming in, and everybody's cheering for him. Now, Israel, they're thinking of this moment for them, right? Because they are going to have this glorious moment. They're finally going to get their king. Rome, which is their yoke, is going to be removed. They're going to have that earthly kingdom. The glory days of David and Solomon are going to come back, and they're going to be that great city again, and the people that they've been waiting for so long to show the rest of the world that they are special. But Jesus starts crying, which is odd, right? But because for Jesus, he's seeing that they're going to reject the real message. Just like how I said earlier, all of those stories in the Bible were pointing to something. How did they forget that when Jesus, that promise he made to Adam, that he would be the sacrifice, he taught them how to sacrifice, to point to that second coming. And here he is, about to be that sacrifice, basically in the shadow of the cross, about to be crucified, and they're all forgetting that and thinking, oh, the Messiah is going to save us here and be a king. It doesn't make sense. The burden that Israel wanted was a much heavier burden than what Jesus was offering them. He wanted that spiritual transformation. He wanted to be their Savior in that spiritual level because it would transform them from the inside out. The rest of the world, they were not seeing Israel the way that they thought that they were being seen. So, this is what's interesting to me, that at that moment, he's crying because soon enough, because of what they chose, they're going to lose their lives even. So the burden that we're thinking, we need to remember and look, because we might not actually be serving God. Look at this Friday Further Thoughts. The very first quote that is there really caught my attention. When you find your work hard, when you complain of difficulties and trials, when you say that you have no strength to withstand temptation, that you cannot overcome impatience, and that the Christian life is uphill work, be sure that you are not bearing the yoke of Christ. You are bearing the yoke of another master. It's very interesting, that quote, because it's basically saying that if you have all these burdens and you're wondering, why is it so difficult, and almost giving up, you're not really following Christ. You're creating another problem that might not necessarily be what you need. So, just like how I was talking about earlier, the type of burdens that we have, that we sometimes harbor, this whole theme is about rest, but it's focusing on that spiritual rest, because when you can live with yourself and not feel like what you're harboring is that horrible, we know that there's one person out there that can bear our burdens, and that his yoke is light for that reason, because he's there to help us, the same way that he helped Peter, the same way that all those moments in the stories, if they had followed what God was saying, it would have been light. So are you following what God is saying to make your life better, or are you following your own?